Hi everyone, it's Mandy from Designs by Miss Mandy, and today I want to show you guys how to remove intricate designs from your cutting mat. So this is something that I get asked about a lot because a lot of my designs that I create are pretty delicate and can be a little tough to get off your mat and not rip them to pieces. So I thought that I would just cover it in a little video for you guys. But before we get started on that, I wanted to go over just a couple tips. So first, before you even make the cut, there's a few things you need to consider. The first thing is the type of material that you're using. I mostly work with paper. I know that a lot of people with cutters use vinyl for their creations, so I'm going to be mostly focusing on paper today. Just for reference, the kind of paper I usually use is the Recollections cardstock from Michaels, and I usually try to get it on sale when they do it for like 2 for $5, and you can get these packages of like 50 sheets, or these cool ones for like 36 sheets that have like the gold foil or copper foil, and I really like those. And this paper is really sturdy and it holds up really well whenever I cut it, and so I really like that about it. And my designs usually come out pretty crisp whenever I use this paper, so I've stuck to it for most of my designs. The one downside is it's 8.5 by 11 instead of 12 by 12. But if you don't need your designs to be 12 inches wide, then you don't have to worry about that too much. I occasionally use linen paper. So with linen paper, you have to be a little bit more careful because it can snag a little bit easier. So you want to make sure to have your settings on as light as possible to make the cut so that the likelihood of snagging goes down, if that makes sense. So besides material, you can also do thicker materials like felt, or even I've done rubber, and if you're doing those kinds of materials, there's a lot of other things to consider. So the next thing to consider is your cutting mat. So I use a standard grip cutting mat, which is the green one if you have a Cricut. And I use a standard grip for almost everything. The difference is if I'm doing a really intricate cut like I'm going to show you today, I wouldn't use a brand spanking new one like this because it grips a little bit too tight and it makes it really hard to peel the design off. So for less, I try to save my new ones to do like less intricate designs on, something more simple without a lot of cuts in between. That's what I would use a fresh mat for. One that's been used like maybe 5 or 6 times for designs like that are like perfect for intricate cuts. You don't want it to be so loose that the paper moves everywhere when it's doing the cut, but you don't want it so tight that you're almost having to rip it off and it just becomes too much of a hassle. You can also use a light grip cutting mat, and those work really well too. So for your blade, I use the premium blade that they have, and that works for pretty much any kind of design that you're doing. If you are once again using a thicker material, then you will probably need to use the deep cut blade. The other thing to consider is the size of your design. There's not like a specific rule of thumb for this, and you can always try to push your limits. But basically, the more intricate your design, the larger you can cut it, the better, the more crisp it'll come out, and the less likelihood you'll have of tearing. Also, if you're designing your own cut files, one little trick I've learned is that, at least with the Cricut, if you're doing a design that has more straight lines and angles, you can go pretty fine on the details, but with things like curves and especially swirls, the Cricut has a really hard time with that when you're getting down to really small sizes and really small line widths. So you can, once again, there's not like a really standard rule of thumb for point size on how thick your lines can be, but if you're going to be doing swirls or anything like that, you kind of need to do them a little thicker and make your design a little bit bigger. But if you're doing angles or straight lines, then you can go smaller, and who knows, you can just try it out. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to say is that your cut setting. I wanted to talk about that because your cut setting can be, I used to always think like, well, I just want to make sure it cuts through the paper, so I'll just put it like as high as it can go. But I learned pretty quickly that's not a good idea. You want to actually have your cut setting be as light as possible for the type of paper or material you're using. So for the kind of paper that I usually use, the Recollections cardstock, I usually keep my cut setting at light cardstock. Except for the black paper. Oddly enough, the black paper is like just a little bit heavier, and so I do light cardstock plus. But anyway, that's just weird and random. But yeah, so light cardstock is what I try to keep it at. And if you're not sure about the cut setting, I would try to do it just a little bit lighter than what your instinct tells you. And then before you peel off your design, just peel it up a little bit on the edge before you've actually ejected it from the machine and see if it cut all the way through. And if it didn't cut all the way through, you can send it through again on a slightly higher cut setting. But when you do it too hard, when the cut setting is set too deep, you're more likely to tear your design, especially when you're doing something delicate. So anyway, yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so I've got my design here, and if you ever were wondering if your setting that you just used wasn't quite deep enough, before you eject it, you can kind of peel the paper away and just make sure that the cut went all the way through. And if it didn't, then you can always just send it through again on a little bit firmer setting, and then you'll be good to go. But this one obviously went through, so I'm going to eject it. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to flip this over, and I like to take off the scraps. And it came off nice and easy because this is kind of an old cutting mat. So I've got my design, and now I'm going to flip the mat over again and just slowly peel it away from the mat. And it's always good to be cognizant of where your really delicate parts are of the cut, to be extra careful in those sections. And this will also help the design not to curl. And if you're ever going one direction and feeling like there's too much pressure or it might tear, it's good to just flip it over and go the other direction. Slow and steady. There we go. Need to weed a few things out of there. There you have it. Cute little Alice in Wonderland card. See, this design has a lot of really intricate details, but because I had the right cut setting and because I took it off nice and slow, it didn't curl, and everything came out nice and clean. Anyway, thank you for watching and happy crafting. Bye-bye.